Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to ScreenFlowLive. This is Andrew Haley at Telestream. I'm the product evangelist for ScreenFlow and Wirecast here and a lot of our desktop video solutions. I'm basically back this week. Last week we were very excited to announce the launch of ScreenFlow 6. So that means that this new logo that you're seeing up in the corner there is the new version. We've been waiting for it for a long time. It's got some great new features. I think it's the best release we've ever seen. I think one of the things we try to do at Telestream is every release we want to get better and better and better. We don't want to go backwards. So please, I think everyone that I've talked to and all the us internally here at Telestream, as well as some of the customers I've talked to, all agree that this ScreenFlow is the one they like the most so far. And we hope we can continue to outdo ourselves in that respect. So thanks so much for just being a fan, tuning in today. If you haven't heard of ScreenFlow before, or if you have and you're a long-term fan, either way, we want you here. Leave a comment or a question. We'll be monitoring those. You can also tweet us at ScreenFlow, and then I'm not sure if we have a hashtag today. Are we doing a hashtag ScreenFlow or anything? We can put that live if we need to. So we'll hashtag ScreenFlowLive. There you go. Thanks, everybody. So just tweet us at the hashtag. We can throw those on screen if you have questions. You can also leave a comment here in the comment section. We'll be monitoring those. We can also pull those on screen in a little bit as well once we start getting rolling. So if you have questions for me, I'm happy to take those. This show is really all about you. We just want to get on, interact with you, talk with you, show you what's new, go through some of the new features. We worked our way through kind of the top features, the partial screen capture as well as animated GIF export last week. And we touched a little bit on the powerful new motion and animation effects that have been added to ScreenFlow 6. There's some really cool stuff that the team's come up with that we think you're going to really like. It takes your productions to this whole new level. You can do things that I think previously would have taken you hours in After Effects, or you might have even had to write custom code for, and it basically interpolates all this subsequent physics and animation information into your ScreenFlow projects, and so you can animate these elements in ways that would have been incredibly time-consuming before. And so I think we'll cover that today. We're going to cover that in depth, and that may take us most of the time we have. So if we get to further down the list, on some of the other new stuff we can show you, we'll try to do that. But for today, that might be enough to bite off and cover. So again, I think if you have a question or there's something you do want me to cover, I had one request this week from a customer named Pal Joachim. He wanted me to cover how you might do a rounded video inside of ScreenFlow. And I might be able to talk about that today as well. So either way, we will get moving and dive right in. You can see on my desktop here, I've got the What's New in ScreenFlow 6 webpage open. It's at telestream.net. And you can basically click on ScreenFlow and then click on the What's New link, and you can learn all about what we've added to this version. So we're just working our way down this list. Last week, as I said, I covered the top two. And then today we'll kind of focus on this one right here, the new motion tab and powerful animation effects. And so we've added these new effects you've never heard of before, probably, called Spring, Gravity, and Pulse. And you could it's pretty great. You could just click on any element in your timeline and apply these animations properties to that element, and you get some pretty cool results. So the best way is if I just show you, but I'm not going to be able to show you all the things that these animations can do and these properties can do. You're really going to have to spend some time with them, explore them, and try them out for yourself, and then you're going to get different results from what I might get. And by stringing them together and trying different combinations and adding different, animating different properties or applying these to different properties, you'll get some really cool stuff. So I can't wait to see what you come up with. If you do have a video you want to share with us, please post a link or tweet at us a link on Twitter. We'd love to watch anything people make in ScreenFlow. It's one of the fun things we get to do here. All right, so that aside, let's open the new ScreenFlow and dive right in, and let's play around with some animation properties. So in this case, I'm not going to need to use my built-in iSight camera or any of the recording properties here that you see on screen. Instead, what I'm going to do is zoom over here so you can get a better look. I'm going to click on the new document window here, and that's going to take me to the properties where I can basically choose the document dimensions that I want. So I can either choose to go with my screen dimensions, which might be useful if I was recording my whole screen or something like that. I don't plan on doing that here. For my case, I think a HD 1920 by 1080 document's great. I tend to work in that size. The other size I work in a lot is the 720p HD. I rarely work in these other formats, but if you're creating content for something like, let's say you've got content you want to put on Snapchat, these would be great templates for you to look at. If you were creating content for the Mac App Store or for, say, iTunes or anywhere you needed to get specifically, formatted and dimensions that will relate to the iPhone or the 5, iPhone 6, or so forth, then you'd want to choose one of those. But for my part, I typically choose 720 or 1920 by 1080. And what's nice about that is it basically creates a new document that's ready to go in those correct dimensions. And now I know that anything I animate inside this canvas area is going to fit that size, which fits perfectly into an HD video on Vimeo or YouTube or any of our other destination or publishing partners. HD video is the standard these days. So what I'm going to do to demonstrate these new properties is I'm going to bring in, let's zoom out a little bit, I'm going to bring into the timeline just an image file or a logo file. And one that I could do or I use frequently is the ScreenFlow logo or the Wirecast logo, just whatever happens to be in my pictures folder here. In this case, I've got the Wirecast logo, so I'm going to open that and double click it to add it to the timeline. So that basically brings in the the Wirecast logo and pops it right onto the timeline you can see there. And we'll zoom in to make that a little larger. By default, the still duration, the duration of a still image, which could be infinite, it could go on forever. It's just a still image. The editor like ScreenFlow could display it, never ending. It would just make your project really, 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 really long, and eventually your computer would bog down or crash. So right now, by default, it's set to, I believe, 5 seconds. You can change that if you want to. A lot of people are doing slideshows or doing rapid fire images that they bring in a bunch of pictures. They don't want to change the length of them, each one individually. They just want them all to be the same length. You can find that in the preferences. So if I zoom up here, we click on the preferences, that'll pop this open, and you can see under the timeline, I believe here, the timeline tab of your ScreenFlow preferences, there's this still images duration, which is set to 5 seconds. So you can change that, and then any images you bring into the timeline will be whatever you set that to be. So could be 1, 2, half a second, whatever you want. For our purposes, 5 seconds is a great starting point, because I think an animation or a short animation we're going to do would be anywhere between 5 and 10 seconds. I don't think we're going to go much shorter than that. So it's a good length here, but I wanted to mention that. There's also a whole bunch of other default lengths here that you can set, including stuff for your text. If you have a text box, how long do you like text to be? Again, we find 5 seconds is pretty good for a starting place for your average text or your average image that you want to be on screen. That allows you a second or two for a transition in and a second or two for a transition out, and then the element itself is going to be on screen for 2-3 seconds, which is about enough time for people to kind of read and process that information. But totally up to you to set it to what you want. Another great thing you can do is set your default for your transition. So whenever you add a beginning and ending transition to a clip, you can change that. By default, I love the cross dissolve because I think that's the most commonly used. Cross dissolve is a great beginning and ending default transition. But if you're into, you're doing a special project where every transition needs to be a little bit more, comic pow or something. A lot of these transitions you're seeing here are from our Flotility pack, which have some really fun transitions in them. I recommend you download that or check it out. If you're interested, you can spice things up a lot. It can be fun. But as a good kind of plain standard vanilla transition, the cross dissolve, you can't really go wrong with. Track height, I don't want to cover all this, but just play around. If you haven't checked your preferences, you should check your preferences. ScreenFlow 6 has changed a few things, and there's definitely some important settings in here that could really impact your workflow. I highly recommend taking a little time just to go through these and make sure everything's to your liking. And everyone's preferences are going to be a little different, obviously. That's why we call them preferences. All right, so that aside, we've added our 5-second still image clip, and I want to create an animation to that. So what I'm going to do is drop this down to the middle in case we need to do something there. I'm going to head up to my new motion tab, which is right there on the inspector to the right. We've added this new video motion property tab, and this is where you will control a lot to do with these new animation properties. So let's just take a look and see what some of them do real quick, and then we can spend some time tweaking and refining and see how that impacts or changes things. So the first thing we're going to do is I think we'll start maybe a little bit into the clip. We're going to drag our playhead in. I would like the motion or the action to start somewhere around there. And then we will click the Add Action button up here. And that's just going to add a video motion action. Very similar to any action you add. It's still going to be considered very much like a video action. Basically, the video motion and the video action box looks the same. They are the same box. The only thing that then differentiates this from a standard ScreenFlow video action is if you check this box up here, which turns it into an effect action. If you, and I'm just going to be zooming in and out a lot here just so you can get a good look at this. But if you check this box, this is going to tell ScreenFlow that this video action's a little different. It's calling on some preset behaviors that we've coded into the application for you that's going to make this video action that much more dynamic or behave in some new ways. So checking this box turns it from just a standard video action into a video motion action, or what you might call an animation, what we call an animation effect. So the minute you check that, all of this stuff in the video motion tab becomes visible, and you can change it. So if it's not checked, none of this applies. It's just a standard video action. You can change the scale, the rotation, the position, and so forth. Checking the box now makes one of the 3 effects take place or take part in whatever parameters you change. So if this is confusing or if it doesn't make sense, let me try to explain it this way. And by checking the effect, you can see this video motion has now changed from, or this video action box has changed the title. It's now called Spring. So now you know this effect on the timeline is one of our 3 animation effects. Spring. The other 2 are gravity or pulse. And let's just spend maybe real quickly, you can see what each one does without me really doing much at all. So I'm going to change this to a spring effect, and all I'm going to do is take this from the top of the screen to the bottom at the end. Okay, so at the beginning, we're up out of the screen, and then at the end, we're at the bottom, kind of springing onto the screen. So if I haven't really changed much at all or done anything, all I did was change the position at the beginning of the action, and at the end of the action, we're in a new spot. Then what does spring do to it? Let's see. Make this a little smaller. All right, here we go. The quick way to check this is actually just using the preview button. Let's watch that again. Great. So you can see right there, it moved positions. If we did not have spring checked, what would happen? What would this look like? Well, it's just swapped back to a standard plain vanilla video motion. And you can see that the the icon just moves from one position to the next and smoothly stops. It doesn't do anything. There's no extra motion. Nothing happens. Nothing amazing. Just a standard video motion. We can change the curve type so it does that at different speeds and at different tempos. So we could ease it in so it slowly started to come on screen and then it sped up as it reached the bottom. We could do an ease out, which is the reverse of that. It comes on quickly, and then by the time it gets near the bottom, it slows down, and so forth. Just changing each of these will change how quickly that action happens and then how kind of smoothly it seems to happen as well. Linear is pretty boring. It's going to stay the same speed the whole way. Nothing's going to change. Very straightforward. Now, adding the spring effect, what does that do? Really dynamically changes the behavior. Now we've got it popping on the screen and kind of bouncing back and forth just like a spring. So pretty self-explanatory. What other types of behaviors? What if we changed it to gravity? Let's see what gravity does. And Deborah Lee, could you throw me on the screen so I'm in the bottom right corner or left? Yeah, right corner there. Thanks. Okay, great. Sorry, it's easier, I think, if I am seeing you while I'm talking to you about these things. So let's see if we add gravity one more time. What does it look like? All right, so similar to spring, but less of a boing, oing, 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 oing kind of effect and more of a bounce, and it kind of hits the bottom and bounces up and down. It doesn't have the same spring-like effect. It feels much heavier, right? This animation and the properties that are changing that have been added to this action now seem to have a weight to it, which is why we appropriately named gravity. All right, finally, let's talk about pulse. All right, so this time it's still falling from the bottom to the top, just like we told it to, but the whole time it's pulsing in different sizes. And so the scale is pulsing. Now, that may not be the effect you're going for, right? That might be better for something that's in position. When we change from the bottom of the screen, the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen, pulse may not be the right effect for this type of motion. It might be something much better applied to an object that's staying still. Like what happens if we, for example, just instead of keeping this at the top, and falling onto screen, what if we just keep it there the whole time? What does the pulse animation look like? Right. Great. So that might be a situation which you would prefer to use the pulse. Now, an interesting idea here is, again, if we jump back to the beginning of the action, we pull this off screen so you can't see it, and we uncheck scale, but we apply pulse to the position. So here on the right, you can see a couple other boxes. Apply the action to one of these three properties or none of them. Scale, position, and rotation. We haven't changed the scale of the logo. It's the same size the whole time. We haven't changed the rotation. I didn't do any rotation to it from the beginning of the action to the end of the action. All I've done is change the position. So what happens when we add pulse to just a positional effect? So pulse is now not changing the size of the logo at all. Pulse is just pulsing between positions. So it's jumping off screen and on screen. So it looks like it's not even related. These checkboxes aren't even related to the parameters that I've changed myself. They apply to what does pulse do? Does pulse change scale? Does pulse change rotation? Does pulse change and so forth? So you may just want scale checked because that's what pulse does. It kind of changes size and gets bigger or smaller in pulses. But what about rotation? And here you can see you've got this, it's pulsing back and forth between different rotation positions. So while falling. Interesting. So you can get in and change some of the different parameters of each one. In this case, we're going to probably just focus on spring, but again, encourage you, I don't know if we'll have time to try all the different variations. There's just an infinite number, but let's go back to spring here. And let's say we like that, but what if we want it to be even bouncier? right? So in that case, we might change some of these sliders on the right here. We have 3 sliders associated with the spring effect. And just for quick reference, there's different types of sliders for each effect. Gravity has things called elasticity, strength, velocity, and squash. Spring has damping, mass, and stiffness. And then pulse has the pulse count, the frequency, and the amplitude. So obviously, each one of these effects has very specific settings that you can adjust, and they are contextually specific to that effect. They're not going to apply, you're not going to get the same types of parameters for each one. So keep that in mind. All right, let's go back to spring here, and let's just play around with the damping one. Let's say we take the damping down to 1. What does that look like? First thing to notice is our spring box just got a lot longer, right? So this, by just changing the damping, I have significantly, if I make the damping higher, say around 15, the spring effect box goes really short. If I make it the damping low, like a 1, then the box actually goes beyond the length of the 5 seconds of the clip. And I need much more time to do that. So let's preview this now. So it's still animating. That damping effect is how quickly does the spring slowly die down. I think you could apply this again to, are you seriously, is there no damping? Is there no control? Is there really no friction or any resistance to while the object is springing? Or is there a lot of resistance? Does its momentum die out very quickly? Huge difference, right? Now, the reason that this box is growing or changing at all is because I have this other box checked, which I haven't talked about. This is called the lock to box, and this makes a big difference in your animations. So depending on whether it's checked or not, you're going to see a very different type of action or behavior. So when it's checked, what it does is it tells ScreenFlow that you want ScreenFlow to do whatever it takes to calculate the amount of time that it will take to animate that effect. So if the damping is at 1, you're basically telling ScreenFlow, I don't care how long you get, the box needs to be whatever length. Actually, let's do that. Let's make that shorter so I can make the whole thing really long. Okay, so you're telling ScreenFlow, I don't care how long it takes you to animate this. Go as long as you need to make it look smooth. And in this case, ScreenFlow is going to take almost 6 to 7 seconds of time just to animate this, kind of run through the whole animation. It's just going to take as long as it takes because the damping's at 1. ScreenFlow needs to calculate, okay, well, if there's no resistance, this is how long it takes for the whole thing to slow down. Now, what if, say, I change the position at the top? What if we didn't start as high? What if we started lower? And then we make the damping. We'll just adjust this real fast. Make the damping. We're going to adjust that again. See how that looks. It looks like it's going to take just as much time, but this time the amplitude, it's not bouncing as high as it is, but it's still going to be a lot slower. So damping doesn't seem to factor in your starting position versus your ending position, which is interesting. I didn't know that, so I wanted to see what that looked like. The next thing that you want to try is what does it look like if you uncheck this box? If you have lock to checked, 7 seconds of effect duration, right? ScreenFlow is just going to take what it takes. And by the way, I'm going to jump back to the top here. So we're off screen when we start. All right, now let's uncheck the box. Now, I have control over how long the effect is. What if I don't want it to last that long? Right, 7 seconds is just too long. I want it to stop maybe around 3 seconds, but I still want the damping to be that minimal. Let's see what that looks like. Well, we had a jump at the end, right? Because the damping wasn't really lining up to what I set the parameters at. So keep that in mind. If you I generally keep this box checked because I like ScreenFlow to do the math for me. And then if I need to change, one of the parameters, I can make the box shorter or longer by adjusting the effect using the sliders. But if I'm just manually doing it myself, I can't do that if the lock to box is checked. Now I can certainly make it as long or as short as I want, but I might be cutting off some of the animation, or I might be going way past when the animation is already done. So keep that in mind. Or you might slow the animation so much that it's going to just crawl by the end of it. So there are, definitely downsides, some upsides that you have control, but be aware that you may not play out the animation to its full length, or you may go way past when it should end, and you get some weird behavior with that. So even at that point, the animation box is still going, but nothing's happening on screen. I've actually taken the action box beyond its relevancy. All right, let's play with some of the other features or the other parameters in Spring. Let's see what that looks like. We tried playing with Spring and the damping. We know what that looks like. Let's play with something like the mass. Right now, the mass I have set to 0.75. which I believe is the default. But let's take it up to a much greater mass. And you can see what's happening to my box again. It's getting really long. So I'm just going to not go too far with it. And let's preview it with a higher mass. I've now increased the mass by about 4 times or so. Much heavier, much slower, right? So the object is getting more mass. I think it's very descriptive of what we called that parameter. Now, how about stiffness? So maybe that mass is a little too heavy. I want it to be a little springier, a little bouncier. Let's try that. All right, still a little slow. But again, you can see the more mass that an object has, the longer it takes to come to rest, right? So again, the physics seem to be pretty accurate here. And it's kind of neat to see it in action when you apply it. Let's try the stiffness. Stiffness is currently set to around 100. I'm going to drag it down. Let's take the stiffness to like 5. Stiffness doesn't seem to be changing the length of my action box at all, really, which is interesting. It doesn't seem to be tied to time. And let's preview that. So stiffness is down to 5, decreased by a factor of 20. All right, so really interesting effect again. We have increased the weight, and now we've dropped it to the bottom, and there's really almost no bounce. It's almost like we increased the damping, but it has even more of a noticeable effect. It really only bounces once or twice, and then it's done. What if we take the stiffness up to, say, 200? Double it. Moves really fast, and there's a ton of bounce to it. So you can get a really wiggly effect by making the stiffness much higher. Okay, so that's kind of the gist on how different sliders affect different animations differently. And again, we could uncheck all the boxes here. You just have to play around with the combinations. At this point, I haven't applied it to scale, haven't applied it to position, haven't applied it to rotation. In fact, you took all the teeth out of this animation by not allowing it to animate on certain properties like the position and the scale. Now, the rotation doesn't seem to matter. If we just do position and scale, that should cover just about all of the animation, because that's all it really needs to get the effect of the spring on this particular object. If we apply it to just rotation, you're going to see it's not going to do much. Now, if we rotated the object by the bottom of it and made it, say, upside down, let's see how that affects things. What's interesting about that is it really rotated up at the front, and now it's just settling down into its final rotation position. Most of the action was actually off the canvas screen, so we may need to want to change the position to, say, down near the bottom here. Now, if we watch this, you get a really nice spring to the rotation of the object. So again, since the object had no inherent rotation, there really wasn't anything for ScreenFlow to add to it. But once we added a little rotation, it gets kind of interesting. Same thing I think applies to any scale or anything we do with scale. If we undo here, I'm going to go edit, undo position, edit, undo rotation, I believe. So let's go to the end here. Okay, so we're just changing position again. And what if we just do scale? So scale doesn't do really anything because that property hasn't been animated. It looks like position in this case is the only property that we've animated. If we were to change not only the position but change the scale of the object, and in ScreenFlow 6, you may or may not know this, but or haven't tried this yet, but you used to have to click and hold your shift key to scale proportionally. And that was a bit of a pain because 90% of the time I was scaling proportionally. It's rare that you need to squash or distort an object. You want them to stay the way they look normally and just make them smaller or larger. And before in ScreenFlow 5, you had to hold the shift key to do that, and which was kind of a pain because you were always holding the shift key just to resize things. Now, with the new way of working, you don't need to worry about that. Just go resize the object. If for some reason you do want to squash it, well then hold your shift key. And now you can do some distortion effects or some weird stuff, make it squashed or make it really long and narrow. That is going to be the exception rather than the rule. I find that once you get used to that, it's way better. If for some reason you didn't like it like that, you almost always squashed or changed the perspective or distorted your objects, that's a preference thing. You can go to the preferences and you can change how you do that. Which I believe is the canvas lock aspect ratio when scaling with the mouse. That's now, you can check or uncheck this box and you will get the behavior the way you want it. But I like to keep it checked now. I'm used to the new way of working here. All right, just a little tip there. So let's see what it looks like if we add some scale to this. So now we've changed two properties. We've changed the scale and the position, and we can apply. So you get this cool spring effect. It's applying to both. If we only changed two properties, but we didn't animate both properties, so in this case, we only applied it to, we changed both scale and position, but we only are putting spring on the position, well, then you get the bounce up and down effect. But it's going to keep growing while it's bouncing up and down linearly. Now, if we do the same but reverse that, we just apply spring only to scale but not to position, you're going to get a spring as it goes larger or smaller, but it's going to have a constant rate of fall and it's not going to bounce up or down. So again, these boxes here really matter as to what properties have you animated or changed with the video action, and what ones are you applying the effect to. So checking or unchecking those boxes, some of them will have no effect whatsoever. If we check rotation, it's not going to matter because we didn't change rotation. But these other two we did change. We changed the scale and we changed the position, and you're going to get some different effects based on whether you've chosen to apply the animation to those properties that you've changed. I hope that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of something you'll figure out as you go along, but between checking these boxes, adjusting your parameters, and then what you've changed on the action itself is how the video motion will play out by the time it's done. All right, with that, I think maybe we could take some questions, or we'll check the comments here. I haven't had a chance to look at them. Do we have a, can we put them up on the screen? Are we ready to do that? Okay. That's okay. How do you make yourself appear without a background? Alex Friedman. So, Alex, we have a green screen behind me, which you can see if I do this. New configure recording. I'll just pull up my record video. So you can see right here, I'll adjust my screen. I have a green background behind me, and we're using Wirecast to stream this live to Facebook, which is another software that we make. And in Wirecast, we take out the green background, and then we put this video camera in the lower right corner. And so it looks like the background's all taken out, and it's just me is left. And then we put my computer screen in the background behind me. But you should, if you were just looking through the camera, you just see me in front of a green wall. All right, not a ton of questions, so that's okay. If you guys don't have a ton of questions, we don't have to, spend too much longer on this stuff. There was something that somebody asked me to show as far as making a video that looks like this, but without the green or the chroma key. What if you don't have a green background? What if you're not using chroma key and you want to use kind of a cool vignette effect? So I'm going to just do a quick recording and show you what that would look like. So in this case, I'm going to just hit record. We're going to record the screen here. I'm going to count down. And let's say I move, this around. We talk about a few things, whatever it is we're going over. We stop the recording. Open a new document, and what you get is this cool template that ScreenFlow automatically creates. It takes your video camera and throws you in the lower right corner, and it puts your screen recording behind you. So very similar to this setup we've made in Wirecast is almost the default setup in ScreenFlow. It's the default template. Now this video isn't by nature this small. It's actually a full screen, 1920. Actually, I think it's a 1280 by 720 on this laptop. So it could go much larger, but ScreenFlow figures, well, if you're showing your desktop, you probably want people to see what's on there too, because you chose to record that, and they can't see it if your video is full screen. So we made it easy. We just auto create this template where you're in the lower right corner, you're kind of out of the way, but your video is still viewable to your audience. Now this looks good enough. Now if because I have a green background, I can key this out, and I've done some tutorials about that. But some of you don't have that, or maybe that's not the effect you were looking for. Maybe you just want, you don't want a square edge on this. You want it to look a little nicer or a little different. And that's where you can do something cool with ScreenFlow 6. Over on the right here, you've got this new corner property, which is neat. You can actually round the corners of the video. So it's no longer this hard square rectangle. You've got a nice rounded, now almost oval or pill shape. And then if you go over the cropping, you can actually crop left and crop right. And as long as you're centered, you can get almost a perfect circle on this. And now I can move this around the screen. Hold on. And I've got this neat sort of circle effect, which might work for some of you. Might be a nice little way to make some videos. And if you add or turn off the shadow, you can do that as well. You can even change the offset on your shadow and of the object and so forth. So neat way to work there if you want. And that was a request from, as I said, I think Pal Joachim. He wanted to see how we might do that. It's not a perfect matte. What you're doing is you're just rounding the corners and then cropping the video to make it smaller. If you want to do a perfect matte, then what you're going to need to do is going to be a little more complicated. You probably need to create a green object or circle and then key out that green and then make it hopefully just I'd have to think about how you might do this, but I think there might be a way to do it if you create some sort of matte on your own. I'll need to play around with that, and maybe I'll be able to show that in a future version. But I thought a little bit about that. I said, well, what if you wanted to do it perfectly circular? This wouldn't be the method to do that. You can get an almost perfect circle, but not quite. So to do the other way, I'd need to play around with it and try a couple things. But I have a couple ideas on how that might work. All right, well, you guys, if that's it for the questions today, then, feel free to tweet them. Can we throw can we throw tweets on screen? Do we have any from the hashtag ScreenFlowLive? Okay. So if we don't have, oh, by the way, the star on my chest is kind of you're seeing behind it a little bit because it's green, so it's getting keyed out. But so I'll hunch down a little bit. So ScreenFlow Live, you can tweet us there. We're here every Wednesday at 2:30 Pacific time, and we're happy to take questions and get on the air. We just talk ScreenFlow. So if you have feedback, you have videos you want us to watch, I'd love to spend some time. I think in the future we'll be interviewing some key ScreenFlow people who use it, how they use it. We'll go over that. This is just a fun, informal way to connect with you guys and learn what's important to you and share new things about this product that we all love and enjoy. I'm going to check comments one more time, but I think that may be it for today. Dave, you're welcome. Thanks so much. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope to see you next Wednesday. So long, guys.